My name is Annalee Miller. I teach 4th grade at Pflugerville Elementary School.
Ever since her school subscribed to DBQ Online, Ms. Miller has taught 5 or 6 units every year. We wanted to learn about the instructional moves she has found to be most effective. So we spent a week with her class as they started and finished a unit on the Dust Bowl.
I think we spend so much time working with the DBQs because it has a lot of the same structure that we use for writing for the state standardized test. The DBQ really lends itself to teaching the kids to use evidence and to support their ideas. You know, it might be daunting to a teacher to use the online thing because they might not be familiar with it, but the kids catch on so quickly, and it kind of gives them this independence on being able to notate their own, you know, the documents and the background essays, and it's easy for them. They really surprise me with how quickly they pick that up.
Before she starts a new unit, Ms. Miller likes to review the documents and get a rough sense of how long she'll need to analyze each.
I also like to look to see what the end result is going to be, what is their essay or their written response going to look like, and then try to plan out how many days this is going to take for each of my groups.
Next, she preps the unit.
You can add the teacher annotations onto the different documents, and I like the different options that you can turn things on and off depending on what your class needs.
Of course, it's always possible to remove a document.
You know, giving you more time to focus on the ones that you leave in. Today we're just going to start with the hook. I like to kind of start off slow and really give them some time to process this. I think when you approach the hook that you yourself have to show that you have this buy-in and that you have this real interest in this. The way that you present it, if you're excited about it, I think that's going to get them on board for sure. I like to do a lot of walking around during the hook exercises when they're having discussions and really kind of asking some probing questions and really kind of think critically and to really think deeply about these things.
The hook also gives her an insight into how interested the students are, how much she'll have to push or sell the topic of the DBQ.
Versus the group that's just like ready to dive right in.
Why would I want to leave my younger brother at home by himself? Even in reality, I wouldn't do that. Okay.
As students turn to the background essay, they'll see some sticky notes Ms. Miller has inserted, reminding them of how she'd like them to engage with the text.
So I have a sticky note here that asks them to include hashtag summaries, which are kind of like a play on Twitter or Instagram hashtags, where the students will put a hashtag symbol and then 1 or 2 words that summarize that paragraph. And so I'm asking students to do that for each paragraph, and one of them asking them to give the image of the map kind of a caption. I also have used the circle tool and the square tool to remind them to circle the dates and to put squares around the different places in the background essay to kind of help draw their attention to those important details.
None of this is written in stone. As students get farther along into a unit, Ms. Miller is constantly reassessing her game plan, adding reminders as needed.
So we circle dates, we underline places, and we always highlight those bolded words that are in the background essay. Then that reminds them that they can click on it. Because then it'll show them the definition, which is really great to have that right there.
Term especially used in the Southern Plains.
Doing this prep work in the beginning is not only helpful to the students, but also helpful for me. I can remember what things I had planned and what I wanted to teach that day.
The goal is to simply guide the students' thinking, leaving the analysis up to them.
And more farmers started coming in.
She also shows students how to use the layers and how they can toggle to the teacher annotations.
They can turn those on so that they can see the things that I've left. But then I also show them how to turn them off so that that won't interfere with the notes and the things that they leave. What I also like to do with the background essay is to have the students read the first sentence of each paragraph to give them a gist of what this whole background essay is going to be. And they would highlight those sentences and read them aloud. That way they're kind of getting an idea of where it's going and how it's structured.
Sometimes Ms. Miller uses the read-aloud features on the background essay.
Texas Panhandle sold off much of its 3 million acre spread to wannabe farmers.
Just as often, though, she'll read it with her students herself, stopping, explaining, and pointing out and discussing the extra textual features like maps and images.
So that way they're really taking everything into consideration. So after we complete the background essay and we answer the questions, we do the pre-bucketing phase where we really set up the question and then we kind of look at the buckets and we decide what are we going to use, what evidence are we going to use, how are we going to organize what we're about to read to help support the answering of that question. What we're trying to find out is what is causing the Dust Bowl. So when we look down here at our pre-bucketing, do we know what caused it right now? No. But we know that we're going to find reasons, right? So how could we label these buckets?
Reason 1, reason 2,
Oh,
reason 3.
what is it?
Reason 1, reason 2, reason 3.
Reason 1, reason 2, reason 3. That's where we have to start, right? Because have we read anything yet?
No.
So just like Brianna said, we're going to label this reason 1. We're going to label this reason 2. And this one, having the pre-bucketing done is really giving the students a goal for their reading and really keeping them engaged, so they're not just looking at this piece of text and just kind of reading through it and thinking it might be boring, but what was causing these things to happen. What are causing the sicknesses and the clouds and the dust and things like that. So it really does help realign their thinking. They know that this is going to be something that is going to be able to support the question and give them reasons and evidence to be able to write their final product.
Turning to the document analysis, Ms. Miller preloads some online instructions.
I always have my students put a red box around everything that's important from the document, so that would include the source and if there's any note. The source and the notes are very important to the document, and I don't want them to skip those. A lot of times they give us some background information, and also it gives us an opportunity to teach what a source is so that they can see where these documents are coming from. Okay, think about it. What do you have to make sure is included in that box, Nico?
The source and the notes.
The source and the notes. Why are those important? Why do we need to know the source and the notes? Nico, what do you think?
It's like where it's from.
Yeah, we need to know where it's from, right? We want to know. Laser focus our eyes, and we're going to make sure that we read everything that's in that box. So that tells us, are we going to skip the source and just go straight to the big chunk of text? No, we need to know where this came from, right? So we're putting it all together. So the sticky note usually just says, don't forget to box all important information. And then I also like to use some little coding clues. They can write the letter I if it's something that they read that they find is interesting. We use a question mark if it's something they're not sure about. An exclamation point to say, oh, this is important, but this is important to the question. So sometimes they're like, oh, this is important, people were getting sick, but I want them to make sure that it's connected to the question. So I always put important to what caused the Dust Bowl or whatever the question is. The exclamation points mean that she thought it was like really exciting and must have something to do with the cause of the Dust Bowl. Okay, so the exclamation points were tying it to the cause. So she read this, and she read this part, and it said the dust storm was speeding eastward, and she goes, oh, well, in order for some dust to speed towards you, you have to have what kind of weather? Wind. So she was like, maybe that's something that made this big storm happen. So what did she use right here? Exclamation points. Okay, a whole bunch of them. She did use a whole bunch of them. And then we use a C to connect to something else I know. So that could be something else we've learned in class, or a book we've read, or a personal experience that they have.
As always, the goal is to keep students engaged.
This reading, especially in elementary level, is a little daunting, and it's not the language that they're used to. And so I want to make sure that they're constantly kind of asking themselves questions and really digging in when they're reading.
After they've coded a document, students are asked to share things they've noticed, connections they've made, say to a movie they've seen or a book they've read.
Or maybe they want to ask the question, I read this part and I don't understand it, can we work through it? And so I think giving them that time to talk to each other and to me helps clarify things for them.
Over the years of teaching DBQ online, Ms. Miller has found that it's perfectly okay to blend both paper and pencil work and the online tools.
I think a lot of times when people are using the online features, they think that they just have to use that. But in reality, it's just kind of like an added tool for us to use. And I think being able to blend both together when finding what works well for your class is really important. After we've gone over the background essay and some of the documents, I like to use the feature where I can manage the assignments and look at each student to see what work they've done on the document itself. So I pulled up a student's here, and I'm checking to make sure that he did his hashtag summaries for his background essay, and he did, and so I'm going to leave him a note that tells him, thank you for showing your work or for completing this assignment. And then for document A, we went through and used those codes of like the I, the question mark, and he did that here. So I want to know why this sentence is interesting to him. I think, when you're right over a student's shoulder or you're really near to them when they're working, they kind of turn it on and they work really hard for you because they know that you're watching. Make them feel like they can do it and that they can keep pushing through to get through the document. This feature makes them realize that, at any point I can pull this up and look and see what they accomplished, and gives them that internal thing of thinking like, oh, she's going to be looking at my work, so I want to do my best. My overall goal for going through the documents and analyzing them is to make sure that they're going to be able to have clear reasons to support what the question was at the beginning, that the kids are reminded of what the goal is here, and the goal is to analyze these documents to help us answer that question that we read in the beginning. You're going to look at this document. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, and you're going to do what? What does it say here?
Underline.
So if there's two different things in here, I heard somebody go, oh, tractors, and somebody else said, oh, grass. So you're going to think about that, and then you're going to look at the picture too. And if there's anything in the picture that you think was a cause to the Dust Bowl, why don't you circle it? Okay? All right, so you guys are going to have a couple minutes here to kind of do that. A lot of times after we do a document, I like to do a whole class discussion so that everybody can kind of talk about what we were reading and what we were learning and what we were getting from that, in hopes that maybe some of those kids who had some gaps will be able to learn from their peers as well. As we go through the documents, they're able to make more connections to see kind of how they all work together. They start to realize like, oh, this is another cause, and then are able to kind of think about those buckets that we talked about in the beginning.
Throughout this process, she is constantly reminding her students of the crux of their work.
What's the purpose of looking at these documents? And so we're always reminded that it's the question, what caused the Dust Bowl? I make them repeat it multiple times in the beginning just to make sure that we're on track. Can you say the question?
What caused the Dust Bowl?
Okay, good. And so we heard 3 different. So we finish the document analysis, and then for the next day try to prepare for the actual bucketing and the chicken foot process.
This is when students really begin to process and synthesize what they've learned.
So that we can then put those into organized buckets. What could we label these buckets now? What are some causes of the Dust Bowl? Talk to each other really quickly. I like to do it where the kids are sitting in small groups or with partners, and they're looking back on all the things we've talked about and looking at those buckets and thinking, how can we put labels on those? How can we group these documents and this evidence that we have together? And I think having them look through those kind of starts to help them connect the dots of like, oh, I think all these kind of are going to go in this pile because they somehow don't match with these, but we're not sure why they don't match with these yet. After doing the bucketing process, they now can look at that chicken foot and go, oh, those 3 lines must connect with those 3 buckets we just made. Then that part to me becomes very easy, and it's not something I have to take a lot of time on. It's something that's quick and just makes sense to go into next.
DBQ Online offers both a step-by-step essay builder and a simpler guided essay feature.
One thing I really like about the guided essay is the sentence starters that they give. I like that it has like paragraph 1, and then it tells you what should be included in paragraph 1. Like you should have a grabber, you should have background information, which again is, pulling stuff from the background essay that we read, and restating the question, and then using that chicken foot as like, here's what's about to happen, and then the conclusion, which the conclusion information is good too. I think the all those statement, which honestly I've never used prior to the DBQ. I never thought that although was a good way to start a conclusion, but I think that word gives so much meaning to how they're going to close this essay, because they may have thought one way at the beginning, but their thinking has definitely changed after looking at all of the documents and learning all the facts.
The although statement is also a useful way of approaching the next step, the thrash out. It helps students see other possible answers to the question, even as they argue that, based on the documentary evidence, their answer is especially convincing.
They will get into groups and decide what evidence is going to support their argument the best, and then we will go through like a traditional thrash out. While each group will share their arguments by using the evidence, and then we'll even have a chance to go back and analyze what they heard from the other groups and talk about weaknesses and strengths of their own argument.
For Ms. Miller, the thrash out is an indispensable step.
When the students are taking a side, I think it makes them more connected to what we've just learned. You can really hear their voice in their writing, which I think is really important, and you can really tell that they're using that evidence and those facts to really drive home the purpose of the DBQ. I think if you just say, pick a side and go, then that can be kind of confusing for the kids because, this has lasted over days. So sometimes they need some redirection and kind of have to funnel them into what they should be focusing on. We're not asking them to argue or talk over each other, but I think what I teach my kids is that when it's their turn to talk, they stand up. And then if somebody wants to interject, they need to wait till the other person finishes. That person sits down, somebody else can pop up. They're going through the process and they're coming up with these talking points and they're finding the evidence and then they're arguing with each other. Once they do this kind of activity, they go and they're ready to write, and they cannot wait to get all the good stuff that they said down on paper and be able then to share that with even more people than just the people in the classroom. It's almost like they feel more confident because they were able to find that evidence and use it, and it's fun to watch.
Finally, it's time to write the essay.
I never skip the writing. I've found that when they're revising and editing and looking back on their work, it's almost like they're proving to themselves wow, I really did understand this, or I am an expert on this now. And I think that gives them so much pride and ownership to their learning to see that they can do something that's really deep and complex and then be able to express it and explain it to someone else. From then on, when we're doing just our normal social studies curriculum and we're reading, they're reading differently and they're thinking so much deeper than they were before. It might seem like a really long time, but the amount of skills that they're learning, those carry over to all subjects and they enjoy it so much. They don't realize, how much deeper their thinking has gotten and how much better they are at expressing what they've learned. I just think they feel so smart, which I feel like they should feel that way because I think they are.
We will always know that the dust storm was the most wretched dust storm in history.